The elevator door slid open on the 42nd floor, and my world tilted on its axis. There they were, Margaret Chen, our chief financial officer, and Diana Westbrook, the vice president of operations, two of the most powerful, untouchable women in our corporation, locked in an embrace that spoke of years of hidden longing. Their lips met with a desperation that made my breath catch. Margaret's hand tangled in Diana's perfectly styled blonde hair. Diana's fingers pressed against the small of Margaret's back. They hadn't heard the doors open. They hadn't seen me frozen in the hallway. My monthly reports clutched against my chest like a shield. In that stolen moment, everything I thought I knew about power, secrecy, and desire shattered like glass. I should have cleared my throat. I should have backed away quietly, pretended I'd never seen anything. Instead, I stood paralyzed in that carpeted hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs as I watched two women I'd admired from afar finally break apart. Margaret saw me first. Her dark eyes widened, and a flush crept up her neck, the same neck that Diana's lips had been pressed against seconds before. She stepped back sharply, smoothing down her charcoal suit jacket with trembling hands. Diana turned, following Margaret's horrified gaze, and the color drained from her face. "Sarah," Diana said, my name barely a whisper. She was trying to compose herself, to slip back into the armor of corporate authority, but her lipstick was smudged, and her chest rose and fell with rapid breaths. I was 41 years old. I'd worked at Chamberlain and Associates for 15 years, climbing from junior accountant to senior financial analyst. I'd survived 3 recessions, 2 hostile takeovers, and countless rounds of layoffs. I was competent, invisible, and utterly expendable. And now I'd witnessed something that could destroy 2 of the most influential women in the company. "I didn't see anything," I heard myself say, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. Because I had seen everything, the way Margaret's fingers had traced Diana's jawline, the way Diana had leaned into the touch like a woman starving for affection, the way their bodies had fit together with the practiced ease of lovers who'd done this 1,000 times before. "Sarah, please." Margaret's voice cracked, and I'd never heard her sound anything less than completely in control. She was 53, brilliant, ruthless in negotiations, and terrifying in board meetings. Seeing her vulnerable felt like watching a goddess bleed. "I need to deliver these reports," I said, holding up the folders like a white flag. "The elevator malfunction delayed me, that's all." Diana's jaw tightened. She was 50, tall and elegant, with the kind of presence that made junior associates stammer. "There was no malfunction." "There was," I insisted, meeting her ice blue eyes. "I was stuck between floors for 10 minutes. That's why I'm late. That's why I took the stairs to this floor. That's the only reason I'm here." Something shifted in the air between us. Margaret and Diana exchanged a glance, a whole conversation passing in that single look, the kind of silent communication that only comes from years of intimacy. "Thank you," Margaret said softly. She straightened her shoulders, rebuilding her walls right before my eyes. "We should all get back to work." I nodded and walked past them, my legs somehow remembering how to function. I could feel their eyes on my back as I headed toward the finance department, could feel the weight of the secret I now carried pressing down on my spine. I'd just become either their greatest liability or their unexpected ally. I wasn't sure which terrified me more. 3 days passed without incident. I buried myself in spreadsheets and quarterly projections, trying to forget what I'd seen. But at night, lying alone in my apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The raw emotion in that kiss, the years of secrecy it implied, the courage it must have taken to love someone in the shadows. I'd been divorced for 7 years. My ex-husband had left me for a woman 10 years younger, someone who wanted the things I'd realized I didn't. Children, a house in the suburbs, a life mapped out in careful heterosexual certainty. The divorce had cracked something open in me, made me question things I'd never dared to examine before. But I'd been too afraid, too conditioned, too stuck to do anything about it. On Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Diana Westbrook's extension. My stomach dropped. "Sarah Mitchell speaking," I answered, proud that my voice stayed steady. "Sarah, this is Diana. Could you come to my office? Margaret and I would like to speak with you." It wasn't a request. "Of course." "When?" "Now, please." The walk to the executive floor felt like a march to my own execution. I rode the elevator, that damned elevator, to the 45th floor, where the real power resided. Diana's assistant waved me through without making eye contact, and I wondered if she knew, if everyone somehow knew. Diana's office was all glass and steel, with a view of the city that made you feel like you could touch the sky. Margaret was already there, standing by the window with her arms crossed. They both turned as I entered, and Diana closed the door behind me. The click of the lock sent a shiver down my spine. "Sit, please," Diana said, gesturing to the leather chairs in front of her desk. I sat. They remained standing, a power play that wasn't lost on me. "We need to know," Margaret began, her dark eyes searching my face, "what you plan to do with what you saw." "Nothing," I said immediately. "It's none of my business." "But you could make it your business," Diana said, her tone sharp. "You could go to HR, you could spread rumors, you could use it as leverage." The accusation stung. "I'm not that person." "We don't know what kind of person you are," Margaret countered. "We've worked in the same building for over a decade, and we barely know each other. You're efficient, quiet, and forgettable. No offense intended." "None taken," I lied. Diana moved closer, her presence commanding. "We've worked too hard, sacrificed too much to let this destroy us. Our relationship has remained hidden for 18 years. 18 years of stolen moments, secret trips, and living half-lives. Do you understand what that means?" I did. God help me, I did. Because hadn't I been living my own half-life? Playing it safe, hiding behind spreadsheets and professional courtesy, never admitting what I'd started to suspect about myself? "I understand more than you think," I said quietly. Margaret's expression shifted, something like recognition flickering across her features. "What do you mean?" I should have stayed silent. Instead, I found myself saying, "I know what it's like to hide who you are, to be afraid of what people will think, what you'll lose if the truth comes out." The room went very still. Diana sat down slowly, studying me with new interest. "Are you—" "I don't know," I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I've spent 7 years since my divorce not knowing, not looking too closely at why I felt relieved when he left, why I've never been interested in dating again. And then I saw you two, and it was like watching something I've been too terrified to name." Margaret's eyes softened. She exchanged another look with Diana, that wordless communication again, and then she smiled, actually smiled. "Well," she said, "this is unexpected." "You need to understand the stakes," Diana said, leaning back in her chair. Her guard was still up, but something had shifted. "This isn't just about us. It's about everything we've built." Margaret moved to sit beside Diana, their proximity speaking volumes. "We're not just colleagues, we're partners in every sense of the word. We own property together, have made investments, built a life, but on paper, we're just two single women who happen to be friends." "Chamberlain is a conservative company," Diana continued. "The board is composed of men in their 60s and 70s. They tolerate women in leadership because we deliver results, but they're looking for any excuse to push us out. A scandal like this would be exactly what they need," I finished. "Precisely." Margaret's jaw tightened. "We'd be out within a week. All our work, our influence, our ability to mentor younger women in this company, gone." I thought about the junior analysts I'd seen Diana champion, the way Margaret had fought for equal pay initiatives. They weren't just protecting themselves. They were protecting their ability to change things. "So what do you want from me?" I asked. "Your silence," Diana said bluntly. "But more than that, we want, well, we'd like to get to know you, to understand who you are, what you want. If you're going to hold our secret, we'd prefer to be able to trust you as more than just a silent observer." It was Margaret who added, gently, "And perhaps we can help you figure out some of those questions you've been afraid to ask yourself." The proposition hung in the air. They were offering me something I hadn't known I was desperately craving: connection, understanding, a glimpse into a life lived authentically despite the risks. "I don't want anything from you," I said carefully. "Not leverage, not favors, but I wouldn't mind having friends who understand." Diana's lips curved into the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. "Friends. I think we can manage that." Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. We began having lunch together, not in the executive dining room where eyes watched everything, but at a small bistro 3 blocks away. At first, the conversations were cautious, surface level, but gradually walls came down. Margaret told me about growing up in San Francisco in the 70s, knowing she was different but not having the language for it. Diana shared stories about her marriage of convenience in her 20s, the man who'd known the truth and agreed to be her cover until she'd grown strong enough to divorce him quietly. And I talked. God, I talked. About the emptiness of my marriage, the relief I'd felt when it ended, about the way I'd catch myself staring too long at women in coffee shops, then force myself to look away, about the fear that had kept me locked in place for 41 years. "You're not too old to start living," Margaret said one afternoon, her hand briefly covering mine across the table. "Diana and I didn't find each other until I was 35 and she was 32. We've had 18 beautiful years despite the hiding. Imagine what it could be like without the fear." But the fear was real. It lived in my chest like a caged bird, beating its wings against my ribs. "Take your time," Diana advised, "but don't take forever. Life is shorter than we think, and regret is a heavy burden." It happened on a Tuesday, 2 months after the elevator incident. I was working late, most of the office empty, when I heard voices coming from the conference room. Angry voices. "Completely inappropriate, and you know it." A man's voice, sharp and accusatory. I recognized it as Gerald Thornton, one of the board members. "My personal life is none of your concern." Diana's voice, cold as ice. "When it affects this company's reputation, it becomes my concern. I've heard rumors, Diana, rumors about you and Margaret Chen, disturbing rumors." My blood ran cold. I moved closer to the conference room, staying in the shadows. "Rumors are not facts," Margaret's voice cut in, "and I'd be very careful about making accusations you can't prove." "I have eyes," Gerald snapped. "I've seen how you two are together. The looks, the private meetings, the trips you take at the same time to the same cities. I'm not a fool." "No," Diana said, her voice dangerous. "You're a bigot." The silence that followed was explosive. "This board will not tolerate," Gerald began. "The board will tolerate exactly what I tell them to tolerate," Diana interrupted. "Because unlike you, Gerald, I actually produce results. Margaret and I have increased this company's revenue by 42% over the past 5 years. We've opened 3 new markets and secured contracts you couldn't land in your dreams. So before you start making threats, remember who actually holds the power here." "The board won't stand for this," Gerald said, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. "The board," Margaret said quietly, "will do whatever benefits their stock portfolios, and right now that means keeping Diana and me exactly where we are." I heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly ducked into a nearby office. Gerald stormed past, his face red with anger. I waited until his footsteps faded, then stepped out. Diana and Margaret were still in the conference room, standing close together, foreheads almost touching. They looked exhausted. "You heard," Margaret said without turning around. It wasn't a question. "Yes." I stepped into the doorway. "He has no proof, just suspicions." "Suspicions can be enough," Diana said bitterly. "They just need one person to come forward. One piece of evidence, one witness." She looked at me then, and I understood. I was that witness. I could be the domino that started everything falling. "He won't find one," I said firmly, "because there's nothing to find. Two colleagues who work closely together and happen to be friends. That's all anyone has ever seen." Diana's eyes filled with tears she was too proud to let fall. Margaret reached out and took her hand, a gesture of comfort they usually kept hidden. "Why are you protecting us?" Margaret asked. "You barely know us." I thought about the past 2 months, the lunches, the conversations, the way they'd helped me begin to see myself clearly. But more than that, I thought about the courage it took to love someone in a world that punished you for it. "Because you deserve to be happy," I said simply. "And because I'm starting to think I deserve that too." I told them what I'd been researching, the therapist I'd found who specialized in late life coming out, the LGBTQ plus community center I'd been too afraid to visit. I told them I'd been thinking about what it might mean to finally be honest about who I was. "It's terrifying," I admitted. "Everything could change, my family, my friends, the way people at work see me." "It will change," Diana said gently, "but not always in the ways you fear. Some people will surprise you with their acceptance. Others will disappoint you with their rejection. But what you'll gain is yourself, your authentic self." "Is it worth it?" I asked. "The hiding, the fear, the constant vigilance?" Margaret smiled sadly. "What we have is worth every difficulty. But Sarah, you have the chance to live more openly than we could. Times are changing, slowly but surely. Don't let our caution become your cage." That night, I went home and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. Really looked, for maybe the first time in my life. "I'm a lesbian," I whispered to my reflection. The words felt strange and right, terrifying and liberating all at once. I said it again, louder. "I'm a lesbian." And then I cried, deep, wrenching sobs that felt like they were tearing something loose inside me. Not tears of sadness, but of relief, of recognition, of finally naming the truth that had been living inside me all along. 6 months later, I stood in Diana's backyard during their annual summer garden party, the one event where they could be themselves, surrounded by carefully vetted friends. Margaret's arm was around Diana's waist, no longer hidden, and they were laughing at something one of their guests had said. I'd come out to my family 3 months ago. My mother had cried, my father hadn't spoken to me for a week, and my sister had surprised me by saying she'd wondered for years. I'd started attending the community center, making friends who understood this journey. I'd even been on a few dates, tentatively exploring this new version of myself. The executive board had tried to force Diana and Margaret out, but they'd underestimated the loyalty these women had built, the alliances they'd formed. When push came to shove, the board members who mattered chose profit over prejudice, and Gerald Thornton quietly retired. Diana and Margaret had finally bought a house together, not as friends or business partners, but as what they'd always been, a couple, in love, building a life. "Thank you," Margaret said, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of wine, "for everything." "I didn't do anything," I protested. "You saw us," Diana said, joining us. "Really saw us. And you chose compassion over judgment. That's not nothing." As the sun set over their garden, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I realized something profound. That moment in the elevator hadn't just changed their lives. It had saved mine. It had given me permission to finally stop hiding, to start living. Sometimes the doors open on exactly what we need to see, even when we're not ready. Especially when we're not ready. Are you living your truth? Or are you waiting for the elevator doors to open on your awakening? Life is too short to hide who you are. The journey to authenticity begins with a single admission. This is who I am, and I deserve to be happy. Your story is waiting to be lived. Don't let fear write the ending.